Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goff, and I'm Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera, and I'd like to welcome you to Part 2 of our Software License Compliance Best Practices series. We covered validation of telemetry data in Part 1, and today we'll be covering engagement. We're joined by Revenera's Tommy Knowles, Data Success Analyst, and Meishan Piao, Services Director. Before we get started, though, let's go over a few quick housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Hopefully not that long if I can get through this. If you have any questions or comments, please add them in the chat tab and we'll try to answer them as we go along or at the end of time allows. If we don't get to your questions, don't worry, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Also, please be sure to check out the Docs tab where we've shared a number of resources relevant to today's topic. And finally, we will be sending you a link to the recording within the next 48 hours or so. So with that, let's get started. Tommy?
Amazing. Just loading up the slides, guys. Thank you very much. So, as Michael said, today's the second part of our session, obviously continuing on from last time. And now we're going to be talking about engagement. And as you can see on our slide here, we're going to be building confidence, dealing with infringers, how to tackle some of the challenges that may appear. Obviously, for 15 to 20 minutes, there's no way we're going to cover everything that you guys need in dealing with infringers. However, here's an idea to give like the basis of things. And then for the outcome for you guys, we're looking to help you build confident engagement specialists, more effective and efficient negotiations, and then better outcome and license compliance cases. Hope you don't mind. I'm going to go to the next slide, okay? So, first outreach. Your first outreach sets the tone, makes it clear and respectful. So you need to make this clear and respectful, tailored to your client's context and cultures. What we'll be talking about mostly in here is adapting the outreach based on existing clients versus non-clients. It's a very good thing to keep in mind. Key accounts versus small accounts. You don't want to be upsetting any of your big clients, especially when saying, we found illegal usage. It's something which obviously that you need to keep in mind. And the cultural norms in when you're dealing with different cultures. So for instance, China and Japan could react very differently to how Spain and Germany can be. Germany's very legal based and very strict on these sorts of things. Spain doesn't like the allegations kind of language. You can find they can be quite defensive. In terms of USA, China, and Japan, I'm sure Meishan has a lot more information in that regard than I do.
Yep, absolutely. I would say just be mindful of these cultural differences. I think it's very, very critical to conduct some preliminary investigation right before we engage these customers. That way it instills a lot of confidence before we engage.
Also, Meishan, the regional differences too, right? So in areas where you have high conversion rates, it typically tends to be more of a sales-like approach, right? Where you're just treating these telemetry data like sales leads, as opposed to other regions where it's a little bit trickier. So another good fact to keep in mind, in addition to the cultural norms.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also something which is very much client-based as well. Like depending on the certain type of client that you have, they can deal with it more of a, okay, this is a legal basis, or like you said, more like a sales lead. And I find that the sales lead cases personally tend to be like a little bit smoother in terms of moving forward. And then secondly in here, we're going to talk about the transparency and the education side of these things. It's fantastic that we can go to these clients or these infringers, potentially clients for the future, and express that how these things are being done. Because it's one thing to say we've detected you using illegal software. The second thought in their mind would tend to be, how? Is this illegal? You're hacking me. And obviously, as businesses, this isn't something that we do. We don't condone hacking or any types of the sorts. I'm sure Meishan's had plenty of cases where people have said, how on earth have you collected this data?
Yeah, I would say a lot of times, before we engage, a lot of these cases are handled by IP law firms. So, before we go after anybody, we've already put together a power of attorney in place. So in case if the infringer challenges why we're contacting them, first you can share that piece of document, it carries a lot of weight. Secondly, what customers can also do is put together a signed letter of authorization, right? It's a signed letter on the company's ISV's letterhead confirming that so-and-so, a third party or whoever is authorized to engage on the ISV's behalf to engage in a compliance matter. So it's just a little bit of, extra step that we can take to save us more time down the road if this question ever arises.
Yeah, that's a great point, Meishan. There's definitely a difference when somebody from the company, the software vendor that you're used to dealing with is reaching out versus someone unexpected from someone who's acting on behalf of that vendor.
Definitely. And it comes up to like why it's critical on the side of this slide as well. Like it says, it builds trust and credibility from the very start. And as Mason said, it saves the time. And at the end of the day, these sorts of things need to be efficient, because at the end of these people can tend to drag these issues out a bit longer. Obviously, nobody wants to pay for the software. However, this is what we're here to do, to build future clients and so on.
And I think, Tommy, what you
like I said,
where it's professional and factual, I think a lot of time people need to pay more attention to being factual, especially when you're dealing with existing clients, right? They've already built a relationship with their sales rep within the organization. Definitely. So we certainly don't want to stay too emotional during these type of engagements. So it's highly, highly important to stay factual, right? Conduct these conversations based on the telemetry data. Try to steer away from being overly emotional. Because ultimately, I think it's very important to represent the ISV in everybody's best interest, right? To conduct a professional conversation, but at the same time, it's also trying to compensate the ISV for what's been used without their authorization.
And definitely, like you said, with like the emotional tone of things, it's easy for us to say, okay, you be calm as you're talking to these people. Yes, on first engagement, of course, we're the calm ones. We're here to help engage. It's knowing when to also just keep that tone throughout the conversations, because companies which are accused of infringing or shown that they are infringing can come off quite strong. I'm sure there are plenty of times in other countries and regions where I've heard the language that's been thrown back. It's what it is. And it's for us to, like we say, stay calm, professional, and just keep it all the way through. Well, I think that's everything for this slide. Like I said, like just to cover back over it builds trust and credibility, sets expectations for transparency and collaboration throughout this process. And once again, like Mishan mentioned earlier, it's efficient and it reduces friction and just tries to get the resolution faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once again, continuing on with transparency and education, just a bit more into how this works. So like I said in the previous slide, it's more for building the trust and explaining how this data is collected, emphasizing that everything we're doing is ethical. And like we say here, it sets the stage for constructive engagement from beginning to end. Anything to add for you, Meishan, like on how data is collected? Maybe you could...
Yeah, I think this question comes up quite a bit. Just like how ISV typically like to follow their due diligence process when engage, infringers bring this type of matters very serious. So, any infringer, any legitimate company, we also want to do their due diligence, make sure that, this matter is not a scam. So that's why having the POA in place is important. Having the letter of authorization is important. Having the proper language implemented into your license agreement is also just as important, right? Because it gives you the right to track this type of data for us to have this type of engagement. And then everything else, I think, will just follow. I would say, at the end of the day, the telemetry data carries the most weight, but we want to make sure that from the legal background to everything is in place. That means when you engage this type of cases, you want to make sure you have legal support, marketing support, sales support, because going back to the previous slide, when we go after existing customers, the first thing they would do is probably pick up the phone and contact their sales rep, right? So we want to make sure that everybody that's involved in the ecosystem is aligned in terms of expectations, right? How do we handle that type of phone call when you do get pinged by your current customer saying, hey, I just received this letter from company X, Y, and Z. What should I do? Was this about? Is it legitimate? So I think just make sure you tighten the loose ends to make sure that we are working together. Everybody that's involved, right, in this driving this type of effort is working together and not against each other, potentially stepping on each other's toes.
That's a great point, Meishan. And we're going to cover this in our third part of the series coming up in February about making sure stakeholders are aligned. But certainly if you're using an internal team to do that outreach, you want to make sure that you're alerting your internal team, sales, customer success, what have you, that this is going on, and they might want to get ready for a phone call to come in or an email to come in asking what it's all about. And you guys tell me, but I think in general, most organizations don't want to be non-compliant, right? They don't want to be using unlicensed software. And many of them actually appreciate the notification because it's letting them maintain compliance on their obligations, but also making sure that their public persona stays intact, right? Their brand value, their brand reputations not suffering.
Exactly. And like some of the suffering can come from like certain companies, maybe in engineering and so on, have like ISO certifications. You need everything within your business to be 100%. And obviously having cracked software is something which can be bad implications for them in those regards. So losing those accreditations could in the future mean losing a client. And obviously nobody wants to lose business at the end of the day. Like it's nothing great. And potentially continue on from that without derivating too much from the topic here of transparency and education is that you can have these things and certain industries require pure silence. Imagine engineering and you're working within the arms business and so on. These are all things which are very highly sensitive topics, and to have cracked software is it takes away from that security.
Absolutely.
So I'll move a little bit further down now. Like obviously we've gone a little bit further on how data is collected and so forth. And then what I talk about is like the key messages, like things to bring across to like either clients or to non-clients is that the infringement is a serious matter. At the end of the day, it is a breach of IP law and so forth. Illegal activity has occurred and so on. It's just explaining this to these people. And then I think the main point of all of this is it's fantastic that we've explained illegal activity has occurred, but the goal is resolution. And as we said before, it's not confrontation. We're here to build future business for us and to help you as a business take things further in the way that it should be. Anything to add, guys, or shall I continue on with the slide? I'm happy to do so.
We can move on.
Awesome. So continuing forward is effective communication. Use straightforward language to explain to explain the compliance process. At the end of the day, you want to keep this as straightforward as possible. It's fantastic that we can say telemetry data and X, Y, and Z, but it's easiest for it to explain this in simple terms. The data has been collected due to the fact that a EULA agreement has been signed, like agreed, once you've downloaded and installed the software. We can provide examples. Obviously, the examples are going to be of the data we've collected on said infringer or said company, and then reassure about the party about the fairness and legality of this approach. Once again, going back to the EULA and stating this is for everybody's best interests. Any questions, guys, in the chat at all, or are we happy to move forward?
Let's move forward. I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Awesome, thank you. So here's some of the common objections and responses that we've tend to see in license compliance. Like I said in the beginning of this slide, the beginning of this whole episode actually, is that we can't go through everything, but here are the ones that we tend to hear the most. So you've reached out to the company and the response can be back, that's a personal laptop. So why does this context matter? During working hours at the company premises, this is when the usage has been detected. It's very unlikely that somebody's going to be doing this for personal use during working hours. And you can find a company domain and so forth in the data, which kind of further presses this information forward. And to reply to the company and why this is their responsibility is personal device usage for company benefit equals organizational accountability. I'm not sure if you have anything to add here, Meishan, but like I think these are the key points for that one.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Overall, regardless of any excuses, right? And these are just the three that we've heard most of the time across the board. But I think at the end of the day, the usage has happened without the ISV's authorization, right? It was used with intention to be utilized for commercial gain. And then especially when we can track that the data is egressing from the company's domain, it's 100% guarantee that the infringer or the company is responsible for such behavior. So I think at the end of the day, again, we just have to remind ourselves to keep bringing these conversations back to being factual, right? Make sure that it is a data-driven conversation instead of being overly emotional. Of course, there are just 3 objections that we're sharing here today. There could be other objections that may want to steer you the other direction, and then that we can certainly handle that on a case-by-case basis. But in general, I think it's highly important to remind to the customer. The third one, which I think is hilarious, we thought it was a trial where any
it's a great one.
a cracked copy on their website to offer that as a trial. So right away that it's not a very good excuse to begin with. So you just have to bring the factual piece that show them the factual evidence, right? Show them the infringer, user ID or the pirate ID, right? There's a lot of pieces of information that we can share during these dialogues, also just to show the customer that, hey, we're not accusing you. We're having this dialogue based off of factual evidence that's been collected because of
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
And I think, like you said, with the third one as well, it's a great way to respond to people in terms of, it's fantastic that you feel like you've downloaded a trial version. However, was this trial version received from our website? And then I've heard 10 out of 10 times, I've gone to YouTube and I've done this. And obviously, when you put the 2 and 2 together, it's not really how downloading the fully functioning full version software seems to work.
I mean, when it says there's a former employee, right? Sometimes what we've seen is perhaps there's a outside contractor, right, that's been hired to work on a project for a company. So this contractor may ultimately be the culprit, but regardless, the contractor was on site doing work for your company. So in the end, the company should be responsible. Whether the company should compensate ISV for a new license or the contractor, that's something that the company and the contractor can work out on their own. Our job is simply bring this matter to the infringer's attention, and then the rest, they can figure that out. And we can certainly provide as much evidence as possible to aid their investigation, and also make suggestions, right, to make sure that they can do the right thing and ensure future compliance.
Exactly. It is perfect points to make. And I think the two of them can actually go together in that's a personal laptop and also that's a former employee. Like you said, with a contractor, many companies that we've dealt with over the years as well have even said, we have a specific bring your own device to work policy. Mm-hmm. And these things can be mentioned within. And at the end of the day, like you said, it's there for them to then agree in between. Personal laptops shouldn't be used at work. And at the end of the day, should restrict access to Wi-Fi or Ethernet and so forth. So these are things to move forward from.
Yeah, and I think once we move beyond this point, once we handle these objections, then we can also come in to make proper suggestions, even as far as the type of license they could be considering, right, to ensure future compliance. And I think that comes later into the conversation. But the first, I think any company that steps in that wants to do a license compliance program just need to be ready for these type of objections handling. And not be alarmed, right, when these kind of questions come up.
For sure.
I mean, maybe let's move on to the best practices, and we can sort of wind things up. I know we're all very passionate about this topic, but I want to make sure that we fit everything in.
For sure. So we'll go through this slide here, the best practices. In the high stakes communication, how we say things is just as important as what we say. And this goes hand in hand with what we said before in terms of avoiding emotional language, accusatory language and so forth. Like Meishan mentioned previously multiple times, it's based on data sets. It's not we think you have, it's we have solid evidence here which is pointing to doing so. Going back to our first slide as well, actually, use cultural intelligence to frame the discussions appropriately. Adapt to regional norms. Using law firms within certain countries and regions works fantastically. Having a law firm communicate with a Chinese company from China as opposed to the UK contacting China, you tend to get more of an initial communication faster. Present compliance as a shared goal, not a punishment. I've gone through this one a few times. At the end of the day, we're here to build a connection with the infringers and so forth to make them regularize and for us to regain the loss as a company in general to build a stronger connection with our customers and build a strong client base. And then I think everything in best practices kind of goes through everything we've already gone through. But you build trust by being transparent and consistent. Clear explanations, consistency, all the way through the things that just build that trust and make these matters tend to go faster.
Fantastic. Meishan, anything you want to add?
No, I think Tommy nailed it.
Great.
Sorry, I kind of flew through all four of those.
Nope, that's okay. That's okay. And we don't have any questions in the chat. That's okay. Feel free to send those in to us individually if you'd like. Did get a great comment from Rob pointing out that evaluation licenses are typically watermarked, indicating that the project created was done so with an evaluation license. So thank you, Rob, for that tip. Tommy and Meishan,
very good point.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights today. I know you've been at this for a while, and it's always great to talk to you and hear your perspectives. And thank you all in the audience for joining us today. Again, please be sure to reach out after our session today if you have any follow-up questions. If you're watching this on demand, we're here if you need it. We look forward to seeing you in February, as I mentioned, for part 3 of our best practices series, when we'll be covering organizational best practices to ensure the success of your compliance program. So thanks again, and have a great day, everybody.